Imagine wandering through a quiet bamboo grove when suddenly a soft glow shines from within the stalks. You lean closer, and there, nestled inside a reed, lies a tiny girl, delicate as a doll. The old tale says she was about 4 inches in height, as if she had stepped from another world into this one. This was the first sight of Lady Kaguya, the radiant child whose presence would transform the life of a humble bamboo cutter and his wife. Listen now, as her story begins with the simple rhythm of his days in the forest. Tsunugi no Miyako worked each day in the groves, steady in his routine and unnoticed by the wide world. His living came from the quiet labor of splitting bamboo and carrying it to market, a task as unchanging as the turning seasons. One autumn morning, however, the familiar hush of the grove shifted. At the heart of a tall stalk, a soft glow pulsed like hidden moonlight. When he cut the stalk open, he found her. She was no more than 4 inches tall, small enough to cradle in a single hand, yet formed with delicate perfection. Frightened and awed, he carried her home and placed her in a basket, for she was too slight to rest in a bed of cloth. There she lay like a living doll, stirring gently under the couple's watchful care. For many weeks, she remained as tiny as when she was found, and they tended her with quiet devotion, offering food and shelter as though the child were a gift entrusted to them rather than their own. The tale tells us that after 3 months, her body changed in a way no mortal could explain. Without warning, she grew to the stature of a full-grown maiden, her beauty striking and otherworldly. This sudden transformation confirmed what the bamboo cutter had sensed from the moment of discovery. The child was not of ordinary birth, but of celestial design. His wife, though startled, did not resist the mystery. Together, they accepted their new role with calm hearts, becoming caretakers of the one they believed heaven had sent to them. Signs of blessing accompanied her life in their household. Where once the bamboo yielded nothing but straight green shoots, Tsunugi now drew forth stalks with gold inside, each containing another measure of wealth. The family who had lived humbly on their small earnings suddenly found their home brightening with treasure. They used it to build a stronger dwelling and secure food, yet their manner stayed as unassuming as before. The miracle that enriched them did not breed arrogance. It allowed them only to live more securely while they guarded the strange child in their care. Around the village, whispers spread of the light in the bamboo grove. Neighbors said that on certain nights, a glow lingered among the stalks, or figures moved between the shadows. Such talk carried a mixture of fear and wonder. The tale also records subtler signs of her unearthly presence, how flowers opened more brightly in her path, or how her gaze seemed too knowing for a child so newly come into the world. These images may reflect poetic detail rather than fact, yet they reveal how people felt, that nature itself seemed altered by her nearness. In this way, the couple's household grew both strange and blessed. Wrapped in a mystery the earth itself appeared to guard. The girl remained, watched over with steady devotion, her strangeness no barrier to their love. And as she settled into her place beneath their small roof, her caretakers began to consider how to truly welcome her into their lives. That thought led them to a question every child must meet, no matter how divine the origin: the giving of a name. They soon turned their thoughts to naming her. The bamboo cutter, convinced that she had been sent not by chance but through heaven's will, chose words to honor both her origin and her radiant presence. He called her Kaguya-hime, Lady Kaguya, the shining one of the night. A longer name was also spoken: precious, slender bamboo of the field of autumn. Every element remembered the stalk where she was discovered, the season she came from, and the glow that seemed to cling to her skin. To mark the occasion, a great feast was held. Neighbors came bearing rice and fruit, curious to glimpse the child no longer small enough to rest in a basket. The gathering was filled with song and food, yet even then people spoke in hushed tones when they looked at her. For though little time had passed since her finding, she already stood as a full-grown maiden, more graceful than any seen before. The naming bound her to the household, but her bearing made it plain to all that her spirit reached beyond it. Wealth accompanied her presence, yet it did not alter the family's nature. Gold and treasures appeared within the bamboo the cutter felled, allowing him to strengthen his home and cloak his wife and ward in silk. Still, he labored among the groves, unwilling to abandon the rhythm of his days, while his wife kept the household with quiet diligence. To them, Lady Kaguya was not a trophy of fortune, but a daughter for whom they felt deep, unwavering devotion. As the seasons turned, her luminous beauty drew notice far beyond the fence of their dwelling. Villagers spoke of her as if she were moonlight walking in human form. Some said her hair gave off a faint glow in darkness. Others murmured that she never cast a shadow as other maidens did. Tales like these may have been no more than rumor, embroidered by wonder rather than fact. Yet they spread easily, for those who saw her were often left speechless, struck silent by the stillness that fell when she entered a place. The bamboo cutter and his wife observed these effects with a mixture of pride and unease. They taught her customs carefully, how to speak with courtesy, how to bow, how to show respect. But no instruction could disguise the strangeness of her presence. When she looked upward on clear nights, her gaze seemed to reach farther than the stars themselves, as though she were listening to an unheard voice. In due season, word of Lady Kaguya's beauty began to draw strangers to their home. Travelers paused longer at the grove's edge, pretending to admire simple bamboo work, yet stealing glances toward the house. Gifts appeared at the gate from people of rank. Bolts of silk, pieces of carved wood, promises of favor. The bamboo cutter turned these overtures aside with courtesy, though his heart grew unsettled by the attention. Lady Kaguya herself remained indifferent, still spending long hours wandering among the stalks, trailing her fingers along their smooth surfaces as though they whispered to her alone. All who looked upon her saw a marvel, yet those within the house saw something more fragile. A young woman touched by otherworldly light, steadfastly cared for, but never fully their own. And as whispers traveled outward, beyond the quiet fields and groves, her name drifted farther than either guardian could contain. Soon, in places of power far from the bamboo grove, voices began to repeat that name with a hunger of their own. In Kyoto, stories began to gather around Lady Kaguya's name like mist collecting along riverbanks. A traveling merchant would whisper of her hair, black and shining as polished stone. A monk returning from pilgrimage spoke of blossoms opening near her feet, even when the season forbade it. By the time these tales reached noble quarters, they carried embellishments. Her presence could ease sickness. Her voice could beckon birds from far-off valleys. However exaggerated, the image they painted was impossible to ignore. The bamboo cutter soon noticed noble visitors drifting into his quiet grove. Their robes of silk whispered against bamboo stalks as they pretended to study his work. Courtly manner demanded that men of rank send poems or tokens by intermediaries, but with Kaguya the rules frayed. Her beauty unsettled custom itself, and 5 great men placed themselves at his door without shame. They were Prince Ishizukuri, of royal blood, Prince Kuramochi, a second of imperial lineage, the Sadaijin, or Great Minister of the Left, Abe no Miyushi, the Chiunagon, or Middle Counselor, Otomo no Miyuki, and Morotada, Lord of Iso. Each came with gifts and words rehearsed, declaring they would claim her hand. From behind woven screens, Lady Kaguya received them with courtesy, her gaze cool and steady. It was expected that a woman of rank would choose a husband by waiting on her family's will, weighed among poems and offers. Yet Kaguya gently put aside such custom. She told them she could not give herself to anyone unless their hearts were proven beyond deceit. A person of fickle spirit, she said, was no true companion. To marry without testing them would leave her bound to sorrow. Her voice in this moment is preserved in the tale. She did not wish to mate with one whose heart could change. To each suitor she assigned a trial. To Prince Ishizukuri, the begging bowl once carried by the Buddha across India. To Prince Kuramochi, a jeweled branch from the immortal island of Horai. To Abe no Miyushi, a robe of fire rat fur that legend declared no flame could consume. To Otomo no Miyuki, a dragon's jewel plucked from storms over the sea. And to Lord Moritada, a shell hidden within a swallow's nest, delicate and nearly unreachable. Each man faltered in his own way. Ishizukuri whispered of the unlikelihood of finding relics guarded by temples across distant lands. Kuramochi asked sailors, only to hear that no man knew how to find Horai's Isle. Others made loud promises, but could not conceal the doubt behind them. Yet none admitted defeat then. Some plotted in silence, others drafted vows on heavy paper with bold calligraphy. All the while the pressure around Kaguya grew. Wealthy courtiers circled the bamboo cutter's home. Even the emperor's envoys brought messages suggesting union. Kaguya quietly declined, saying her place was too humble for such an honor. This refusal stirred muttering at court, but no hand dared punish her. The air of awe surrounding her, so unlike that accorded other women, seemed to shield her from harm. The suitors, humiliated yet still burning with desire, turned to whatever means they could summon. Some planned voyages never begun. Others looked for counterfeit treasures, believing a clever imitation might escape her scrutiny. It was in these schemes that the first tale of deception would unfold, beginning with Prince Ishizukuri's attempt to present a relic of the Buddha. Prince Ishizukuri withdrew from the court for 3 long years, though not to distant lands as he would later claim. In truth, he remained hidden in a provincial retreat near Mount Ogura. There he prepared his deception. When the time felt safe, he returned not with stories of India or sacred temples, but with a single stone bowl he had obtained closer to home. Wrapped in fine brocade, it was presented as the very vessel once carried by the Buddha himself, a relic said to hold immeasurable spiritual weight. He bolstered the display with an elaborate scroll, its ink and seals prepared by scribes to mimic the language of pilgrimage. Lines of supposed travel, deserts crossed, and holy mountains scaled gave the illusion of authenticity. In his own hand, Ishizukuri added a personal poem, hoping sentiment would mask invention. 3 autumns I slept on foreign stones, dreaming of home, dreaming of you. This bowl holds only my weariness now. The nobles present murmured approval at his effort, their eyes drawn to the shimmer of brocade. Yet Kaguya remained still. She lifted the bowl once, turned it lightly in her hands, and placed it down again without a word. Then she took up her brush. Her reply was direct, brief, and piercing. A bowl left on Ogura Hill collects only rain, not grace. Who can drink from emptiness? With simple strokes, she revealed what only she knew. Ishizukuri had never left the hills near his home. Her words cut through his ruse while exposing the futility of trying to bind her with false tokens. Courtiers who heard the verse later remarked that where other women wielded poetry to flatter, Kaguya used it to lay bare deception itself. The prince, pale at her response, stammered a clumsy compliment about her moon-bright eyes. Among the learned, such a phrase carried unfortunate weight, for in Buddhist imagery the moon often symbolized illusion rather than truth. His final words only confirmed his folly. Retreating in embarrassment, he vanished from the gathering, cursing as autumn mud trapped the wheels of his heavy ox carts. The matter did not end there. His failed attempt became the subject of whispered tales in courtly halls. Some accounts say he abandoned court life altogether, taking vows as a monk. Others claim he wandered the provinces instead, carrying a plain begging bowl like the very thing he had once tried to fake. Whatever the truth, his name faded from records, remembered less for nobility than for this humiliation. Kaguya herself gave little sign of being moved. She burned his fabricated scroll in a brazier and set the stone bowl upside down upon a rock in her garden. There it filled with rain until moss crept across the rim. Her quiet gesture silenced what little remained of Ishizukuri's claim. The bamboo cutter, watching all this, felt troubled. A relic forged to deceive seemed to him a darker thing than celestial wonder. His daughter could meet trickery with poetry and calm judgment, yet the sight unsettled him. That evening, he found her kneading dough in the kitchen, her luminous hands dusted white with flour. She asked him only whether he preferred rounds or squares, not once mentioning bowls or princes. But when the shapes were laid out, she pressed them into small crescents, as though marking another passage of time. And as the night deepened, she spoke once more, her tone even and knowing. Others would come, she said, with schemes of their own. One already dreamed of a jeweled branch hidden on a far-off shore. Prince Kuramochi claimed he had journeyed across seas to the immortal island of Horai, where jeweled trees were said to grow. In truth, he had never set foot beyond familiar shores. Instead, he commissioned skilled craftsmen to fashion a splendid imitation, a jeweled branch made of gold, silver, and precious stones fitted together so that it glistened in lamplight. The artisans labored long at his request, shaping metal into delicate leaves and carving polished gems to resemble fruit. When at last it was finished, Kuramochi concealed the work in a fine case, preparing to present it as if it had come from a land no mortal could reach. His arrival at Kaguya's home was marked by display. He strode into the courtyard, with retainers carrying the case high, and he himself bore garments stained as though by travel. Speaking with practiced authority, he described mists thickening over unknown seas, golden gates rising from clouds, and moonlight shining on distant gardens where jewels hung from branches like blossoms. Then he had the case opened. The crafted branch stood upright, its leaves sharp enough to catch the light, its stones glittering in colors that seemed otherworldly to many of those watching. For a moment, the courtier's performance appeared convincing, yet the air shifted when voices rang out from the edge of the gathering. The craftsmen themselves strode into the courtyard, their clothing still marked with burns and solder stains from the work. They had not been paid. One after another, they shouted their grievances, pointing directly at the jewels before them. They spoke of the materials once theirs, ornaments melted down, heirlooms reshaped, each contribution folded into the branch's false beauty. What was meant to inspire awe now only revealed deception. Observers watched in silence to see how Kaguya would respond. She did not scold Kuramochi, nor did she raise her voice. Instead, she called for bags of gold, From the treasures her own household now provided through the bamboo grove, she rewarded each artisan directly, granting them more than what Kuramochi had promised. The craftsmen knelt to the ground, their foreheads pressed into the earth, some weeping as they spoke of her fairness. To them, repayment was not only money, but the mercy of being believed and treated justly. Kuramochi, however, stood pale and speechless. His elaborate story collapsed around him. What once glimmered like a celestial object now looked clumsy beside true treasure. Daylight stripped the branch of its mystery, exposing metal seams and overbright stones that could not compare with the quiet wealth drawn daily from Kaguya's grove. Even his fine retinue muttered as they repacked the case, shamed by his failure. Skilled craftsmen in that age could indeed carry influence, for their testimony weighed heavily when questions of truth arose. Kuramochi's downfall was not only in the forgery itself, but in arrogance. He thought those whose hands had shaped the object would remain silent. By scorning their dignity, he gave them reason to expose him. Kaguya recognized this clearly. Her quiet payment corrected the injustice, and in doing so, she affirmed that honor lay not in deception, but in righting what others had marred. She returned the jeweled branch without insult, remarking only that the treasures of Horai could not come from hands marked by broken promises. Her words carried no anger, only truth. For those watching, the lesson rested less on the false branch itself than on her measure of fairness. Soon after, the courtyard emptied. The craftsmen departed praising her name, while Kuramochi's disgraced procession fell into silence. Within the quiet house, life resumed as before, yet those who had been present carried away a weight of memory, the image of a noble's false pride crumbling before honesty calmly spoken. By the time dusk settled, the story had already moved on in whispers to other halls. Another suitor would come next, bearing an object just as extraordinary in claim. A robe said to withstand flames. And it was in this trial that Kaguya's quiet discernment would once more be tested. Abe no Miyushi came with solemn ceremony, his attendants carrying a lacquered box set upon an embroidered stand. Inside lay a robe he declared to be from Morokoshi, China, woven from the fabled fur of a fire rat, impervious to flame. The fabric shimmered as though alive, its sheen catching the lamplight in shifting layers of pale green and gold. Courtiers murmured at its beauty. To them, the robe seemed extraordinary. But Kaguya regarded it in silence, her eyes unreadable. She asked directly whether the garment could truly endure fire. Abe, perhaps certain she would not risk what he called a priceless relic, gave his assent. At her command, a brazier was kindled in the courtyard, flames rising steady into the evening air. Servants stood at a distance and visitors leaned forward, waiting. Kaguya lifted the robe carefully, then cast it into the fire without hesitation. What followed needed no interpretation. The cloth shriveled at once, curling and blackening as smoke rose from the brazier. Threads snapped in the heat, leaving behind only a heap of gray. The air filled with the sour scent of scorched silk. What had been boasted of as miraculous was proven false within moments. Nothing more than a fine garment, consumed like any other. The watching nobles turned their eyes toward Abe. His face drained of color, his practiced confidence failing. He stammered through a fragment of verse, half praise of Kaguya, half apology. But his voice shook as though the fire still burned within him. Kaguya responded softly, not in anger, but in pity. "A robe like this," she said, "is only a beautiful promise undone by flame." Her gentle words carried more weight than reproach. In that moment, it was clear she did not value wealth or rarity, only honesty. Those who had gathered murmured quietly. Some turned away, unwilling to meet Abe's gaze. The courtier withdrew soon after, his attendants hurrying to gather what little dignity they could salvage. This trial revealed something deeper about the suitors' pursuits. Many in Heian society chased imported luxuries, goods from distant lands believed to carry status and wonder. Yet such objects could be false, or their worth more fragile than dreamt. Kaguya, touched with an unearthly calm, cared nothing for their claims. She looked through the glitter to the truth beneath, and it unsettled those who sought to impress her with shows of rarity. Later that evening, the bamboo cutter saw her in the courtyard, brushing away the fine ash that had scattered near the brazier. She worked without fuss, as if tidying up after any hearth fire. There was no sign of triumph, no lingering bitterness. The moment had passed and was gone, leaving only a lesson carved into memory for those who had watched. Word of the burning robe spread quickly through the capital, carried by courtiers who had witnessed the test with their own eyes. Among the suitors who remained, the Chiunagon Otomo no Miyuki listened most closely. His approach, when it came, drew upon a different vision. He did not speak of woven robes or forged branches, but of the jewel said to rest in the throat of a dragon beneath storm-tossed seas. And so the winds began to rise for the next trial. Otomo no Miyuki, the Chiunagon, was given a task heavier than any jewel-laden branch or shining robe. Kaguya asked him to bring a jewel from the neck of a dragon, one said to rest deep beneath storm-lashed seas. In the telling of the tale, dragons and thunder share a bond. Where the great serpent coils in the waves, storms gather overhead. To approach one is to invite not only the dragon's wrath, but the force of the heavens themselves. Miyuki prepared as best he could, wrapping himself in armor and summoning attendants to the shore. Tradition places his departure at Akashi Bay, where ships ventured toward distant waters. For days and nights he pressed his servants onward, the fleet rising and falling against relentless waves. But the further they went, the greater the skies grew troubled. Thunder cracked without warning. Lightning lit the sails in sheets of fire. The sea itself seemed to resist his approach. The courtier's men, terrified, begged him to turn back. Miyuki pressed on, yet the roar of thunder shook even his courage. Accounts of the journey tell that his vessel was nearly dashed upon reefs, his armor waterlogged and splintered. The jewel he sought remained unseen, hidden far below. To reach for it meant daring the storms that enveloped the bay again and again, as though the very gods barred his path. At last, the Chiunagon abandoned his pursuit. His heart, once proud, gave way to fear. He told himself that no mortal could take the dragon's jewel without bringing down divine judgment. Better to return empty than to press further and vanish beneath the waves. By the time he stepped back onto familiar soil, his robes were ragged, the armor rusted in patches, his face pale with exhaustion. Servants carried him inland, whispering that the heavens had rejected his quest. In the capital, news traveled quickly. Some laughed at his folly, saying he should have known no jewel could be won from under Dragon's Guard. Others spoke more softly, reminding one another of the thunder that split the skies when his ship was at sea. They said even Raijin, the thunder god, had shown himself against the suitor. Whatever explanation was offered, all agreed. Miyuki would not return to Kaguya's door. She herself remained silent. From her chamber she listened to the rolling clouds above, her expression hidden as ever. Each suitor fell away in turn, and with each trial the distance between her and mortal men widened. It was not pride that set her apart, nor cruelty. Rather, it was the quiet law that bound her to a path beyond their reach. The tale marks this moment as the close of the nobleman's trials. Deceptions had failed. Rare treasures had burned or betrayed their holders. And now, even a quest that reached across the sea ended only in fear of divine power. For Kaguya, the human world's ambitions pressed against the limits of heaven itself. But word of her beauty and mystery did not end with noble suitors. Higher ears had already heard the stories carried by courtiers and messengers, of storms and treasures, of men returning broken. Whispers found their way upward, into the chambers of the one who reigned above them all. And from that high seat of power, fresh interest began to stir. The emperor first heard of Kaguya through scattered accounts, noblemen returning humiliated, whispers of her beauty silencing even birdsong. Curious but cautious, he sought confirmation. He sent Lady Fusago, a trusted attendant, under the pretense of visiting nearby temples. She returned unsettled, smoothing her sleeves as she confessed to the sovereign that Kaguya could not be seen. "One moment she was before me," Fusago said, "and the next, there was only the rustling bamboo." The court braced for the emperor's anger, but he sat in thought instead. Some matters he seemed to know could not be commanded by decree. Not long after, he announced an imperial hunt to be held near the groves. Such hunts were often ceremonial, where falcons and riders demonstrated the ruler's reach into nature. This one, however, carried another purpose. Under the cover of a grand outing, the emperor himself would attempt to see Kaguya with his own eyes. On a bright morning, horns echoed across the hillsides as courtiers and attendants fanned out into hunting lines. The air rang with bells used to startle game, while riders swept in arcs across the fields. Amid this ordered movement, the emperor guided his own mount toward the bamboo grove. By chance, or perhaps design, Kaguya had stepped beyond her fence to gather herbs. The courtiers later spoke of a stillness that fell as she stood in the sunlight, the stalks moving gently at her side. The emperor drew nearer, the embroidered phoenix on his robes catching the dawn. For a moment, their eyes met. His held triumph. Hers reflected only clouds. Then, without a sound, she vanished. Some swore it was like watching sunlight swallowed by shadow. Others thought she had dissolved into the shimmering stalks themselves. The attendants reached with hands and cords, but nothing remained. Only the grove rustled, as if nothing had ever stirred it. The emperor returned to the palace unsettled. He composed a poem unlike those he usually sent forth, its lines admitting how powerless he felt. He spoke of chords falling slack in the dew and of reaching for something insubstantial as sky. Scholars have long noted its unusual candor, breaking imperial convention by acknowledging failure and doubt. It revealed not anger, but bewilderment. What disturbed him most was not her evasion, but her words. Before leaving the field, she had spoken quietly yet firmly. If she were taken to court, it would certainly cause her death. That statement, echoing in his mind, lent a weight to her refusal unlike any other. For once, an emperor who had mastered ceremony and rank stood powerless before a truth he could not bend. Rumors spread quickly afterward. Farmers claimed to glimpse moonlight moving in human shape along distant paths. Court ladies whispered that polished screens sometimes reflected a face not their own. Each account deepened the sense that she belonged to a realm beyond reach, untethered from mortal order. The failure of this royal hunt marked a turning moment. Suitors had been exposed through greed or pride, and now even the emperor's authority, bound in ritual and pageantry, faltered. To those who watched closely, it was as though the gap between Kaguya and the human world widened still further. And soon, in a quiet house touched by spring rains, she herself would decide to speak of why she had come, and what awaited her when the seasons turned again. It was in the 8th month, as the days grew shorter, that Kaguya began to speak plainly of what had always set her apart. She told the women who served her that she was not mortal at all, but born in the capital of the moon. Her time on Earth, she explained, was only a temporary dwelling. Soon she would have to return. Her tone was calm, as though she were describing the natural turn of seasons rather than a rupture in her family's life. The bamboo cutter listened in quiet dread as she spoke of the moonfolk. They would come to fetch her on a fixed night, she said, and nothing on earth could resist them. No gifts, no prayer, no pleading would change the time that had been appointed. Her words carried no anger, but also no comfort. It was simply the law of her being. To ease the parting, she began to prepare tokens for those who had cared for her. From her own mantle, she set aside a portion to be left as a remembrance, a silken garment so fine that it seemed untouched by human needle. For her foster father, she wrote words in ink that shone faintly even when the lamp was dimmed. These were not the endless lists and detailed artifacts that storytellers sometimes add, but 2 or 3 precious items plainly given: a mantle to keep his memory, and a written scroll to hold her voice after she was gone. She also spoke of something more mysterious. The moonfolk carried what she called a feather robe. Once placed upon her shoulders, it would strip away her earthly memories. Love, sorrow, longing. Each would vanish at the touch of its woven light, leaving her once more as she had been before descending. She did not weep as she said this, but admitted quietly that forgetting even her foster parents would be the hardest part. Another object came from her hand, a bamboo joint that contained a bright elixir. Part of it she tasted herself, as though to seal her link with the world above. Part of it she tried to set aside for the bamboo cutter, wishing to spare him the pain of mortal frailty. Yet when the moonfolk came, that portion would never reach him. In the old text, this act is recalled with sorrow. Her attempt rejected, the precious elixir returned to the celestial bearers. The meaning was clear. What belongs to heaven cannot be left behind for earth. As her departure drew nearer, she asked that her parents not resist. She asked them to guard her gifts and accept the mantle she left behind. At the same time, word reached the emperor. Learning of her true origin, he surrounded her dwelling with guards, archers, and men in armor, hoping to keep the strangers from the moon at bay. The bamboo grove filled with uneasy watchmen, their spears planted in the soil, waiting through the heavy night. The old man clung to the thought that human strength might stand against what she had foretold. But Kaguya's expression told another truth. She moved calmly through the house, speaking gently, tending to her tasks with steady hands. Every sign in her demeanor said that resistance would change nothing. The night of return had been set from the beginning, and when that appointed evening came, the first signs made themselves known in the sky. It did not darken with the pacing of the sun. It dimmed in another way, as if some unseen hand had drawn a veil over the world's light. From the gathering silence above the grove, a bright cloud began to descend. Upon it rested a canopied car, its form gleaming faintly, neither solid nor transparent, like an image caught between light and mist. Within it, Figures of the moon folk appeared. Their shapes wavered if watched too long, their brilliance difficult to fix in the eye. Yet as they drew nearer, the bamboo doors of the house swung open without touch, obeying their will as naturally as reeds bend to wind. The voices of those beings carried no weight of command so much as inevitability. They called for the bamboo cutter by name, Miyako Maro. They told him plainly that the maiden was theirs, and that her sojourn on earth had come to its end. His hands shook as he roused himself and placed his body between her and the light. Staff raised, he stood blocking the way, but the moonfolk did not pause. When he tried to strike, the rod cut only through shimmering air before his grip grew numb with cold. To them, his struggle was beneath notice, mortal effort breaking apart in the presence of what lay beyond mortality. Kaguya did not resist when she rose to meet them. Before the cloud-born company, she drew out the mantle she had set aside for her foster father, a garment folded carefully and offered into his hands. She added also a scroll, her writing steady, its words set down as her final message to the emperor, that she had not been permitted to serve him here, and that her departure was fixed. These she entrusted with calmness, though her parents clung to them with grief. Then the moonfolk revealed what they had brought. One spread out the feather robe, a garment woven of substance not earthly, feathers shifting across its threads as if alive. Another produced a bamboo tube containing the elixir, its liquid clear and glimmering, as though it reflected its own moonlight. Kaguya raised it, sipped from it, and turned as if to portion some for her foster father. But a hand rose from among the bearers, refusing this gift. The vial was taken from her and sealed again. What belonged to heaven would not root itself in the soil of earth. The feather robe was lifted around her shoulders. As its hems brushed her skin, the bamboo cutter's wife wept out loud. Though the moonfolk allowed her to approach, she stumbled through them as through shadows. Where mother's arms reached, they closed on only air. Already the robe's shimmer fell into place, flowing across Kaguya's form like water covering stone. Memory and mourning slipped from her face. Her expression grew tranquil, remote, as if she were recalling a home that had never known sorrow. She turned once more. With neither farewell nor hesitation, she stepped into the canopied car upon the cloud. To those left behind, the maiden they had raised seemed already lost to distance, her figure more vision than body. Then the cloud rose smoothly, carrying her away. Its glow diminished until it was absorbed into the high night sky. Silence lingered over the grove. The bamboo cutter held fast to the mantle and scroll she had pressed into his hands. The elixir, withheld from him, was passed instead to imperial messengers, along with her final letter. These were given to Tsuki no Iwakasa, appointed to bear them to the palace. Both parents watched as the procession departed, knowing that nothing further could be done. By morning, news spread back to the court. What remained was a small bundle, heavy with meaning. The scroll in Kaguya's hand, the mantle she had left behind, and the bamboo tube of elixir untouched. These tokens traveled upward from a humble grove into the emperor's waiting grasp, bringing with them a burden no mortal ruler had faced before. The emperor held both the scroll and the vial of elixir in his hands, objects that shone faintly with an otherworldly light. The scroll carried Lady Kaguya's final words, while the small bamboo tube contained what her visitors from the moon had left behind, a drink that promised life unending. Yet her message was clear. They were not meant to be kept. He did not consume what was inside. Instead, he commanded that these tokens be taken to the highest mountain in Suruga province and destroyed. The task was entrusted to Tsuki no Iwakasa, a loyal retainer who gathered attendants and made the long climb to the summit. The emperor's order was absolute: burn the scroll and the elixir together so that no trace of them remained. On that morning, the wind pressed sharply at the mountain's ridges. The sky was unbroken, vast and pale. At the summit, the attendants stacked wood, while Tsuki no Iwakasa set the objects carefully among it. Kaguya's scroll, with each character written in her deliberate hand, lay side by side with the bamboo tube of bright liquid. Torches were lifted and fire kindled. The blaze rose quickly, taking hold of the mountain air. The wood popped and cracked, yet the burning was not like ordinary pyres. Witnesses told later of a brightness that left no heavy smoke at first, just a pale vapor that streamed upward into the sky as though drawn to its source. The elixir darkened, then vanished within the flames. The scroll flared once as if releasing its words all at once before it, too, was gone. Those attending kept their silence, though some whispered prayers to steady themselves. The fire was not only an act of destruction, but a ritual of release. The emperor's command ensured that the elixir of immortality, an object men might have battled over endlessly, left no temptation behind. His choice aligned with her last request. It honored her departure without trying to undo it. Later chronicles suggest several interpretations. Some believed the emperor refused immortality because such a gift bound a soul unnaturally. Others thought he wished to keep faith with the woman he could not hold. Still others explained the act simply. He followed her instructions with respect, leaving no more to be said. The tale itself supplies no elaboration on his feelings. It speaks only of his decision and its visible aftermath. What is certain is that the mountain itself became inseparable from the act. From the flames emerged a rising column, high and enduring. The old texts say that place took its name from what had been burned there: Fuji, the mountain never dying. The name enclosed both the refusal of endless life and the permanence of her memory. The attendants were said to descend in silence, but the cloud above the peak continued to spiral, pale against the sky. Travelers in later years pointed toward it as a landmark, and storytellers wove the plume into the account of Kaguya, saying her sorrow and the emperor's choice had joined to mark the mountain forever. What followed was more than memory preserved. As time passed, the mountain itself seemed to change, its ridges marked with heat and its summit edged by smoke. People around Suruga began to notice signs in the earth that matched the story of what had been set to flame. The tale suggests that something in the mountain responded to the burning, carrying forward her absence in a new and lasting form. The people said that when the emperor's men burned the scroll and the bamboo tube of elixir upon the summit of Suruga's highest peak, the smoke did not fade as ordinary fire would. Instead, a long white plume continued to rise into the sky, drifting steadily toward the heavens. From that site, the name of the mountain was fixed: Fuji, a word remembered as meaning never dying. The burning was not only an act of release, but also the moment of the mountain's birth in story, its smoke thought to mark the path between Earth and the realm of the moon. The image settled quickly into the hearts of those who saw it or heard of it. While the emperor's court guarded its own version and chronicles, farmers along the slopes spoke plainly. The plume was Kaguya's longing still escaping upward, her presence not lost, but reshaped into mountain and air. Travelers paused on roadsides to watch the column drift, saying it carried with it the message she could no longer leave in human words. What scholars later judged as vapor became, in that telling, living memory suspended above the land, Contemporaries believed the plume itself was endless. They said it leaned eastward during autumn evenings, glowing faintly under moonlight, then straightened tall on winter mornings when crags froze white below. Some described how birds veered wide of its path, as if unwilling to break its form, and how pilgrims halted their chanting when they saw it, believing songs might dilute its purity. The idea of smoke as a lasting presence, born from fire but beyond fire's normal end, gave weight to the mountain's name. Within a generation, the tale of Fuji became part of local lore. People repeated the story as families gathered, linking Kaguya's withdrawal with the enduring presence of this mountain that rose from her absence. Some told children that if one kept silent long enough at Fuji's base, the distant plume could be heard sighing like a breath, neither grief nor joy, but something in between. Such retellings gave the landscape meaning greater than stone or soil. It was not merely a peak, but a visible sign left behind by a woman of the moon. The emperor himself never climbed there again. He relied on messengers, reports, and the sight of the distant column from palace gardens. For him, the name was enough. Fuji, never dying, both a reminder of what he had chosen to relinquish and a mark of endurance placed on the land. He had turned away from immortality, yet the mountain became immortal in his stead, standing as the bridge between human will and heavenly order. For those who lived below, it was proof that moments of love and loss do not vanish, but take new form. Centuries after, poets described Fuji as a place where the sky seemed near enough to brush with the hand. Painters made the plume curve like a scroll unrolling toward heaven, its pale streak fixed against broad slopes. The tale of Lady Kaguya's departure remained stitched into each image. Even when the story was told in fragments or altered by generations, the link between the burning on the summit and the naming of the mountain endured as the decisive act. The plume was Kaguya's trace, and Fuji the vessel that held it. Long after her golden bamboo ceased to grow and her robes no longer shone, that mountain reminded villagers and nobles alike that the celestial and the earthly had touched once and left their mark. It stood not as a place of grandeur alone, but as a keeper of memory. When you look at Fuji today, that is what you see in its quiet outline, the shape of a farewell carried upward into sky. And so the story of a mountain's name completes itself, the visible sign fixed against the horizon. But for the bamboo cutter who once discovered a glowing stalk in the grove, the tale did not end with distant smoke. It continued in the stillness of his days, where each morning brought him back to paths that felt both unchanged and altered forever. The lesson of the bamboo cutter's later years is a quiet one. After Kaguya's departure, he returned to the grove each day with his knife and bundle rope. He still rose with the sun and walked the same paths, but his gestures carried a different weight. Cutting stalks, he sometimes paused and let his hand rest lightly on the hollow, as though remembering the moment light once poured from within. His wife kept Kaguya's mantle carefully folded in a cedar chest, bringing it out only when the moon hung low and bright. These small rituals were their way of holding on without speaking of loss aloud. On autumn evenings, he often sat on the veranda, looking at the bamboo when twilight softened the grove. The leaves no longer shone silver as they once had, but still the patterns of shadow seemed to lean toward her shape. His wife sometimes joined him in silence, bringing tea when she noticed he had been watching the grove longer than usual. Together they shared the stillness, without words to disturb what lingered unspoken. In Japan, this awareness of passing beauty is called mono no aware. It is the ache of cherry petals falling, the hush when morning dew vanishes before noon. The bamboo cutter came to embody this sensibility. Rather than cling to anger or regret, he found comfort in gratitude for the brief years that Kaguya had rested under his roof. His body aged, his fingers grew stiff, yet his cuts remained patient and precise. Every gesture seemed to preserve not only the bamboo, but the memory of care itself. The grove, too, carried its own reminders. On some afternoons, when the wind moved through, hollow stalks created strange, flute-like tones. Villagers avoided cutting such stalks, considering them touched by something beyond human craft. The old man tied red ribbons at their base, not to mark them for harvest, but to protect them, or perhaps only to recognize them. These sounds drifting in the wind became part of the household rhythm, as though the grove whispered what the old couple never said aloud. Life after her leaving was neither rich nor poor. Gold had ceased to appear in bamboo, but their modest savings kept them steady. They continued simple tasks, his wife weaving baskets, he bundling stalks for market. When neighbors asked about the moon girl, he only nodded toward the distant mountain, where the plume of Fuji rose in silence. Those who knew the story asked nothing more. Even after his wife's passing, he held close the memory of their shared guardianship. She was buried with a strand of Kaguya's hair, and her grave faced west toward the mountain's steady smoke. Each day he visited, placing a fresh stalk of bamboo or leaving fruit on a flat stone by the mound. He no longer asked questions or sought answers. He simply kept watch, keeping the rhythm of his care until the end. When his life closed, there was little ceremony. He was laid beside his wife with new bamboo shoots planted at the graveside. The grove remained, tall and layered with sound, continuing to grow as though nothing had changed. Yet those who walked there noticed a hush in its air, the lingering sense that care itself can leave a mark on the world. The old bamboo cutter's last lesson was this: not every bond must last forever to carry weight. What matters is the devotion given, even to what cannot remain. Just as Kaguya returned to the moon, his love and patience grew into memories rooted in earth. The rising smoke of Fuji became the emperor's sign of her farewell, while the quiet grove bore the mark of a father's care. And in the pauses of this old story, moments not filled by deeds or objects but by silence, we glimpse another truth. Words and verse had carried Kaguya's refusal, exposed deception, and preserved farewells. The bamboo cutter's lesson endures not through wealth or power, but through how memory itself can be voiced. It is here that the story begins to shift again, drawing us toward the poems that shaped its telling. Listen now to how poetry threads its way through the tale, not as ornament, but as something shaping its very bones. In the Heian court, where the story grew, waka verses were more than polite flourishes. 31 syllables could carry truths and judgments that plain speech could not hold. Each poem was both a message and a measure, revealing sincerity or deception, devotion or doubt. When Prince Ishizukuri returned with his false relic, he tried to hide behind verse. His poem, lamenting a long journey and weariness, was meant to stir pity and reinforce his claims. But the art of waka was sensitive to tone. Court listeners would know when words rang hollow. Kaguya's answering poem was precise. She alluded to Ogura Hill, near his secluded villa, showing she knew his supposed travels had never left the province. With a few calm lines, she dismantled both his artifact and his story. Verse became the tool that revealed truth. The emperor's poetry carried a different weight. His lines about mist and dew follow familiar metaphors, but in his hand they grew heavy with frustration. The poem describing her vanishing reads at first like convention, yet behind the form lies the unease of a ruler accustomed to command but powerless before a maiden's refusal. His words polished the surface, but listeners of the time would have sensed raw feeling beneath. Even his memorial poem about Fuji's smoke can be read this way: ritual perfection hiding quiet grief. Kaguya's own poems are striking by contrast. Her diction was cool and direct, never straining, never pleading. Where suitors used florid phrases or contrived metaphors, her replies struck like clean cuts, decisive and unadorned. The elegance lay not in embellishment, but in restraint. Spoken from the position of one both present and beyond, her verses carried authority that needed no ornament. Even the bamboo cutter, outside all ranks and conventions, adds his voice with invariant texts. His plain lament, "Gold means nothing now," stands apart from the measured cadences of the court. To readers accustomed to elegant symbols and layered allusions, its starkness may have seemed naive. Yet that plainness is its power. With no veil of convention, his words carry the grief of a parent who has learned that treasure can neither purchase nor preserve what truly matters. Together, these pieces form more than decoration. Poems seal each episode with tone and judgment. A suitor's deceit exposed, an emperor's frustration revealed, a daughter's refusal confirmed. Each verse frames the narrative like panels in a painted scroll. Without them, the tale would move forward, but it would lose the rhythm of speech and silence that gives it lasting breath. Rather than say other stories treated verse lightly, it is enough to see how in this one poetry is central. The rise and fall of each poem creates turns of fortune, and we are meant to listen as carefully to a 5-line verse as to chapters of action. When blunt speech intrudes, such as the craftsman denouncing Prince Kuramochi, its lack of poetic shape is what makes it so striking. Their testimony breaks the pattern, and by breaking it, it proves truer than his glittering lines and counterfeit gift. Think of it as a woven mat. Prose holds the broader pattern. Poetry is each knot that ties it secure. The timeless quality of the tale rests on this weave. Short verses remain in the ear long after plots fade. Even if listeners forget the names of suitors or ministers, the echoes of dew, mist, and moonlight endure. This is why the story continued to be remembered, not only as a sequence of events, but as a series of verses, each like a lantern set along the way. And although centuries have passed, and listeners no longer recite court poetry by heart, these fragments shaped what came after. As the story moved through ages of silence and rediscovery, they helped it find new forms of life. Modern retellings of Kaguya remind us that old stories rarely stay still. They shift with each generation, echoing changing values and concerns. The tale of the bamboo cutter has been told and retold in many forms, from children's picture books to works of art, each preserving her luminous figure, yet reshaping the world around her. Illustrators in the 20th century crafted simplified versions for school libraries, keeping the 5 impossible tasks at the heart of the narrative. Even as details like the gold in bamboo took on heightened importance in eras when prosperity seemed newly possible. In 2013, Studio Ghibli brought the story to cinema through Isao Takahata's The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. His version is often remembered for its visual style, brushstrokes shifting between delicate watercolors and bold charcoal lines. But what gives the film weight is its interpretation of Kaguya herself. No longer distant and ethereal, she becomes a young woman, pulled between conflicting duties. torn by the pressure of suitors and the protectiveness of foster parents, who both love and overburden her. Critics noted how Takahata expanded her interior world, giving her feelings voice in ways earlier versions kept silent. The bamboo cutter, too, changes, still loving, but sometimes blinded by pride, forcing her into the life of a noblewoman when she might have been content in the grove. The film's final sequence, where she looks back longingly at Earth, even as she is borne to the moon, stirred debate. Some saw it as granting her humanity denied in the older Buddhist-inflected texts, while others believed it weakened her role as a celestial being detached from mortal ties. Beyond cinema, the tale's presence lingers within everyday culture. Autumn moon viewing festivals sometimes include small gestures toward her story, bamboo vases paired with pampas grass, or sweets shaped like glowing stalks. Most participants see only decoration, yet for those who remember her name, these details form quiet nods to her origins. In children's plays and textbooks, the impossible tasks remain a favorite part of the narrative, reduced at times to simple treasure quests that still convey the folly of greed and deception. Reflections of her story are scattered softly, not always labeled, but present enough to show how deep it runs beneath familiar traditions. What defines the modern tellings is often a shift in perspective. Earlier versions focused on her celestial beauty and inevitability. More recent ones linger on the grief of her foster parents, who raise a child they know they cannot keep. Writers have drawn out these tender losses: the bamboo cutter's quiet sorrow, his wife's protective gestures, their inability to hold her as she slips away. Small artistic choices, like placing the father's hands against glowing bamboo shoots or showing him staring into empty rooms, grant depth that the Heian-era text, with its restraint, left unspoken. Even in simplified adaptations, that note of shared love and inevitable parting shimons. These changes reveal how the tale adapts to the concerns of the moment. Where earlier readers saw a Buddhist lesson in impermanence, some now see a story about parental love and the difficulty of letting go. Where once suitors represented pride and folly, they are sometimes reframed as reflections of impossible expectations placed on relationships. And where once Kaguya herself was portrayed as aloof, she is now often voiced as someone longing to choose her own path, even if the heavens had long ago set her fate. Each retelling, whether in art, film, or children's theater, filters her story through the questions most alive in its own time. Yet amid the changes, the core remains steady. A radiant girl appears from the bamboo, is cherished by humble parents, and must finally return to a sky beyond reach. That outline has anchored the story across centuries, even as details bend toward modern fears and hopes. It ensures that whether Kaguya is depicted in brush and ink, in animation, or within school books, her story can be recognized at once. In this way, the old tale continues, reshaped but never erased. Each glimpse of her invites listeners to reflect not only on her fate, but on their own. And as the story folds into the present, it carries us inevitably toward its final reminder. One written not in verse, but in the enduring signs left on the land and sky. Watch Fuji's smoke rise gently tonight, an enduring reminder that some beauty is meant to be seen, not held. The bamboo cutter learned this when he released the moon's daughter, allowing her to return to the place beyond his reach. When you next pass a bamboo grove, pause for a moment. The wind through hollow stalks still carries something unspoken, as if laughter lingers in the air long after the voice has gone. Rest with this story, and if its quiet has eased you, consider subscribing for more tales told in this way. Legends endure because they speak to longing, for wonder glimpsed, then yielded back to the sky.